I never imagined my ex-wife's wedding would turn into my ultimate moment of vindication. When her smug new husband mocked me as a failure and told me to cut ties with his wife, I calmly decided to close my $500 million account at her bank. The expression on their faces was priceless, and that was only the start of how I turned 2 decades of disrespect into the most satisfying revenge of my life. My name is Daniel Morris. I'm 52 years old, and I write music for films. Not the big-budget superhero blockbusters teenagers camp out for, but quiet, thoughtful, independent movies that critics adore, and most people never actually see. At least, that was my reality until 7 years ago, when everything shifted, both in my career and in my personal life. I can still see the moment Susan told me she was leaving. It was 2008, and the global financial system was falling apart. Wall Street executives were bailing out, banks were collapsing, ordinary people were losing their homes. I was in the middle of composing a score for a climate change documentary. Not exactly a gold mine, but work that mattered to me. "This isn't working anymore, Dan," she said from the doorway of my studio, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if my dreams were contagious. "I need stability, security, and you're still chasing this dream." The way she said dream made it sound like a terminal disease. "My music pays the bills," I argued, even though we both knew her position at Bennett Financial brought in roughly 3 times my income. "Barely," she shot back. "And what about Emily's college fund? What about retirement? What about our future?" Our daughter was only 9 at the time. College felt impossibly far away. But Susan always thought 10 moves ahead. That instinct made her brilliant at rescuing failing companies, and apparently at dismantling failing marriages. I didn't fight her when she walked out. Maybe she expected a dramatic breakdown, that I'd finally come to my senses, abandon my childish passion, and go get a respectable job like the other husbands in our polished Westchester suburb. But that was never going to be me. After the divorce, I moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn and buried myself in my work. Susan rocketed up the corporate ladder at Bennett Financial and eventually became their CFO. I kept composing, and Emily divided her time between us. As she grew older, though, she seemed to gravitate toward my cramped apartment, where a grand piano dominated half the living room, rather than Susan's flawless suburban mansion. Then came the score that changed everything. It was for a low-budget film about a jazz musician in 1960s New Orleans. I poured every disappointment, every rejection, every doubt I'd ever carried into that music. When that score won the Oscar for Best Original Score, my phone practically exploded. Overnight, I stopped being just Daniel Morris, struggling composer, and became Daniel Morris, Academy Award-winning composer. The irony was impossible to ignore. Susan had walked away because my career didn't seem stable enough, and now my work was generating millions. I'd launched my own production company, built a serious reputation, and made smart investments. The starving artist had become a success story. Not that Susan ever acknowledged it. So there I sat in my Manhattan penthouse, staring at the elegant wedding invitation in my hands, trying to decide whether to show up at her wedding to Lawrence Grayson, venture capitalist, rising political hopeful, and by Emily's account, the kind of man who looked at me during parent-teacher conferences like I was something stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather shoes. I probably should have tossed the invitation straight into the trash. Nothing good could possibly come from being there. But something, morbid curiosity maybe, or a twisted desire to see Susan's reaction when she realized just how much my life had changed, pushed me to RSVPs yes. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't something you scheme about. It's what happens naturally when you refuse to betray who you are. The night of Susan's wedding arrived with one of those flawless September sunsets, washing the Manhattan skyline in molten gold. Adjusting my tie in the back of the Uber, I found myself questioning my decision for the 100th time. The venue was an ultra-exclusive rooftop garden, the kind of place you needed connections just to tour. It was peak Susan. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped into what looked like a spread from a luxury magazine, crystal chandeliers hanging from clear canopies, cascades of white orchids everywhere, waiters weaving through clusters of New York's power players with trays of champagne flutes. "Dad, you actually came." Emily materialized at my side, radiant in a champagne-colored bridesmaid dress. At 19, she resembled Susan more with every passing year, except for her eyes, those she'd inherited from me. Wouldn't miss it, I lied effortlessly. How's your mother holding up? Emily rolled her eyes, micromanaging everything. You know how she gets. I did know. Susan's obsession with control had been the quiet undertow in our marriage, the invisible current that eventually dragged us under. And the groom? I asked, scanning the crowd. Larry's around here somewhere, she said, her voice edged with tension, probably talking about his congressional run. Emily had never warmed up to her future stepfather, despite his attempts to buy her affection with pricey gifts and influential contacts at top-tier universities. Across the room, I spotted Jason, Susan's younger brother, and the only member of her family who'd stayed in touch after the divorce. Unlike Susan, he had always respected my dedication to music, even showing up to tiny club gigs back when I could barely cover rent. "Uncle Dan," he said, pulling me into a hug that was genuinely warm. "Damn, you're looking good. Success really suits you." "You too," I replied, taking in his sharp designer suit with a faint smile. Jason had built his own fortune in tech startups, a world far removed from the high finance universe Susan lived in. "Fair warning," he murmured, leaning closer. "Larry's been asking who invited you. Guy seems threatened. I think he still pictures you as the starving musician." I took a slow sip of my champagne. "Let him," Jason snorted. "Man, he has no idea, does he? Susan never told him about the Oscar, the company, any of it. Apparently not." "This is going to be fun," Jason said, eyes gleaming. "Especially since he's been telling everyone you're—" He broke off abruptly as a tall, silver-haired man strode over with his arm wrapped possessively around Susan's waist. She looked stunning, elegant, polished, flawless. For a split second, when our eyes met, something flickered there. Surprise, maybe. Regret, even. But it disappeared behind the smooth, practiced smile she wore so well. "Daniel," she said coolly, "you came." Before I could answer, Larry stepped forward with the rehearsed ease of a seasoned politician, hand extended. "So you're the ex-husband," he said. "Susan's mentioned you. You teach music." And there it was, the first shot fired. "Teach music," I echoed, letting a faintly amused smile touch my lips. "Not exactly." Susan shifted slightly, her posture tightening. "Daniel composes film scores," she corrected, though she left the rest of the story conveniently untold. "Fascinating," Larry replied in a tone better suited to a discussion about tax codes. "Must be creative work. Anything I might have heard of?" Before I could open my mouth, Emily jumped in. "Dad won an Oscar for Midnight in New Orleans," she said crisply, "and he just signed a deal with Paramount for their new historical drama series." Larry's polished smile faltered for a heartbeat. "An Oscar," he repeated. "Well, that's unexpected." "Life's full of surprises," I said mildly, savoring his discomfort. Susan quickly redirected the conversation, her hand tightening on Larry's arm in a gesture I remembered all too well from our marriage. It meant, "Stop before you dig the hole any deeper." "Emily, would you show your father to his table?" she said smoothly. "The ceremony's about to start." As we walked away, Emily muttered under her breath, "Sorry about that. Larry's been telling everyone you're some struggling piano teacher who couldn't make it in the real world. And Mom didn't correct him." I raised an eyebrow. "She didn't?" Emily shrugged. "Mom's complicated. I think part of her needs to believe you're still failing so she can feel justified about leaving." My seat was at a table well away from the bridal party, polite exile. Not quite outer darkness, but definitely not among the chosen inner circle either. Jason joined me a few minutes later, along with some distant relatives who kept sneaking curious glances in my direction. "You realize you're tonight's mystery guest, right?" Jason said, grinning. "Half the room's wondering why the ex-husband showed up, and the other half is trying to figure out if you're that Daniel Morris, the one who's reinventing film scores." I lifted my glass. "Let them wonder." The ceremony began just as the last light slipped behind the Manhattan skyline. Susan looked radiant walking down the aisle, every inch the powerful executive marrying into an equally powerful partnership. Watching her, so poised and certain, it was hard to reconcile this version of Susan with the young woman who once curled against me on a threadbare couch, talking about lives that didn't involve corner offices and political fundraisers. When they exchanged vows, I felt no sharp pang of jealousy, no urge to interrupt. just a distant, quiet sadness for what might have been. We had loved each other once, but we'd always wanted fundamentally different lives. In a strange way, maybe we had both ended up getting what we were chasing. As the ceremony ended and guests drifted toward the reception area, Emily reappeared at my side. "You okay, Dad?" I smiled at her, my daughter, somehow gentle and empathetic, despite growing up in the fallout zone of our marriage. "I'm fine," I said. "Your mother looks happy." Emily nodded. "She is, mostly. Though sometimes I catch her looking at your album when she thinks no one's watching." "We all have our ghosts," I said softly. "Even the people who look like they've got everything neatly under control." The reception was in full swing now, crystal glasses chiming, laughter rising over the soft hum of the band, New York's elite networking under the stars. I stayed toward the edge of it all, nursing a scotch and observing. This was Susan's habitat now: boardrooms and charity galas, power brokers and politicians. "Not really your scene, huh?" Jason appeared beside me, loosening his tie. "Never has been." "Funny thing," he said. "It wasn't really Susan's either, once upon a time." I raised an eyebrow. "People change." "Do they?" Jason asked, leaning against the balcony railing. "Or do they just get better at faking what everyone else expects?" Before I could respond, movement near the gift table caught our attention. Emily stood locked in a tense conversation with Larry. Their voices were low, but their body language was loud. Emily stiff with anger, Larry jabbing a finger in the air for emphasis. I straightened automatically, parental instincts flaring. "Excuse me," I said to Jason, already moving. As I drew closer, I caught fragments of their argument. "Disrespectful to your mother," Larry was saying. "After everything she's done." "You don't know anything about my father," Emily shot back. "You never even tried to." "I know enough," Larry cut in. "A man who puts his so-called artistic integrity above actually providing for his family." "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice calm as I rested a steady hand on Emily's shoulder. Larry turned toward me, the smooth political mask slipping just enough to show the irritation underneath. "Family discussion, Morris," he said coldly. "Nothing that concerns you anymore." "My daughter always concerns me," I replied, my tone still even but edged with steel. "That's never going to change." Emily squeezed my hand. "Larry thinks my internship at your studio this summer is beneath me," she said. "He wants me working on his campaign instead." I met Larry's gaze without flinching. "Emily makes her own choices," I said. "She always has." "Choices have consequences," Larry replied. "Susan and I want what's best for her future, a serious career, not following her father's unconventional path." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. 20 years ago, those words might have hit a nerve. Back when I silently wondered if Susan had been right, if my stubborn commitment to music had cost me my family. But that doubt had died a long time ago, buried under years of success earned on my own terms. "My past seems to have worked out just fine," I said lightly. "Some people measure success by bank balances and social status. Others measure it by having the courage to follow their passion, even when it's risky." Larry's face darkened. "Easy to romanticize passion when you're not responsible for anyone else." "Dad paid for half my tuition," Emily cut in sharply. "Even when he was barely scraping by, he never missed a child support payment. He never missed a recital, a ceremony, a graduation. So don't you—" "Emily," I said gently. "It's fine," she insisted, taking a steadying breath. "I just need some air." She turned and headed toward the terrace. Larry watched her leave, then swung his attention back to me. "You've filled her head with unrealistic ideas," he said. "The arts are a hobby, not a career." I smiled. "Tell that to my Oscar, or my accountant." His expression hardened. "You got lucky. Lightning strikes once. Emily deserves more than a gamble." "What Emily deserves," I replied, "is to be surrounded by people who believe in what she's capable of, not just in their own plans for who she should be." I walked away, leaving Larry standing there, his carefully crafted narrative of the failed musician ex-husband starting to come apart at the seams. When dinner wrapped up, Susan approached our table, her smile polished but strained at the edges. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her voice carrying that professional warmth she'd perfected over the years. "Beautiful ceremony," I said. "Larry seems confident." "He is." She glanced around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. "About Emily's internship. It's not up for negotiation," I said calmly. "She's an adult. She's making her own decisions." Susan sighed. "Music is unstable, Daniel. You got lucky, but—" "Lucky," I echoed. 20 years of grinding isn't luck." "You know what I mean," she said, impatient. "For every success story like yours, there are thousands of musicians who struggle for their entire lives." I studied her, realizing she still couldn't bring herself to admit she'd misjudged my path, and me. "And yet," I said quietly, "here we are." An awkward silence settled between us until Jason swooped in with a tray of fresh champagne flutes. "To new beginnings," he announced, raising his glass and shooting me a quick wink. Susan murmured something polite and slipped away to rejoin Larry, who'd been watching us with thinly veiled suspicion. "You know," Jason said once she was gone, "she kept your piano." I frowned. "What?" "The baby grand from your Brooklyn place," he clarified. "It's in her study now." That caught me off guard. That piano had been my first big purchase after we split. A promise to myself that I was all in on my craft, even with no safety net. "Interesting thing to hang on to," I murmured. "People keep odd souvenirs," Jason said with a shrug. "Speaking of odd, Larry's about to make a speech. Should be revealing." Sure enough, Larry took the microphone a few minutes later, champagne in hand. He thanked everyone for coming, complimented Susan's brilliance and beauty, and then, without warning, shifted gears. "Some people questioned our relationship," he said, his gaze sliding in my direction. "Some believed Susan should have stayed with someone who couldn't provide stability, someone who chose artistic indulgence over family responsibility." The air in the room tightened. Emily stared down at her plate. Susan's smile stayed in place, but I could see the whiteness of her knuckles around her glass. "But tonight proves that the right choices lead to the right outcomes," Larry continued. "Success isn't an accident, it's intentional. It comes from sound judgment and traditional values." "Is he seriously turning a wedding toast into a campaign speech?" Jason muttered under his breath. I watched Susan, noticing the faint flush creeping up her neck, a familiar tell from our marriage. It meant she was deeply embarrassed, but determined not to show it. "Some paths lead to dead ends," Larry concluded. "Others lead to prosperity. I'm grateful Susan chose the right one." Polite applause followed as he returned to her side and kissed her cheek like he'd just clinched a debate. "What a tool," Jason said. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it. "Better than fine, actually. I'm here. And so is the truth." Watching Larry posture and preen, desperate to assert dominance, I felt no shame, no old insecurity, just a cool, sharp clarity. The rest of the evening, I realized, was about to get very interesting. As the band started playing and the reception slid into the dancing portion of the night, I stayed at my table, content to observe as Manhattan's elite executed the social choreography they'd rehearsed their whole lives. This was Susan and Larry's ecosystem: deals, favors, future votes disguised as small talk. "Aren't you going to dance, Dad?" Emily appeared at my side again, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Not really my thing, sweetheart." She rolled her eyes. "One dance won't kill you." I couldn't refuse her. She led me onto the dance floor, and we swayed to a jazz standard, ironically, one I'd rearranged for a film the previous year. I caught Susan watching us from across the room, her expression impossible to read. "Larry's still fuming about my internship," Emily said quietly. "Let him fume," I replied. "He told Mom it's ridiculous that I'd waste my education on a frivolous industry when I could be making connections in finance or politics." I kept my face neutral, though irritation simmered beneath the surface. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd rather make something meaningful than spend my life selling influence," she said, grinning. He wasn't thrilled. I laughed softly. "I can imagine." As the song ended, Larry appeared. The campaign smile bolted back into place, though his eyes stayed cold. "Mind if I borrow Emily for a moment?" he asked. "Senator Blackwood wants to discuss summer internship opportunities in Washington." "Actually," Emily started. "It's Emily's choice," I cut in calmly. Larry's smile thinned. "Some choices require adult guidance. Not everyone understands what's at stake." "You'd be surprised what I understand," I said evenly. "Would I?" he replied, the mask slipping a notch. Let's be honest, Morris. You're a glorified high school dropout who got lucky with a catchy melody. What could you possibly understand about building a real future? Conversations around us began to taper off, heads subtly turning, people sensing the shift in the room. Dad, Emily whispered, a warning in her voice, feeling the tension rise. Looks to me like my impractical past turned out just fine, I said evenly. Some people measure success by their bank accounts and social standing. Others measure it by having the courage to follow their passion, even when it's risky. Larry's face flushed. Easy to romanticize passion when you're not responsible for anyone else. Dad paid for half my tuition, Emily cut in, her voice sharp. Even when he was barely getting by, he never missed a child support payment. He never missed a recital or a graduation or anything important. So, don't you dare. Emily, I said softly. It's okay, she said, taking a shaky breath and pulling herself together. I just need some air. She walked toward the terrace. Larry watched her go, then turned back to me. You've filled her head with unrealistic ideas, he said. The arts are a hobby, not a career. I smiled. Tell that to my Oscar or my accountant. His expression hardened. You got lucky. Lightning hits once. Emily deserves better than a gamble. What Emily deserves, I replied, is to be surrounded by people who believe in what she's capable of, not just in their own script for who she should be. I left him standing there, his carefully curated story of the failure ex-husband starting to crumble. When dinner wrapped up, Susan came over to my table. Her smile was polished, but her eyes didn't match it. Having a good time? She asked, with that professional warmth she'd perfected over the years. Beautiful ceremony, I said. Larry seems confident. He is. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. About Emily's internship? It's not up for debate, I said calmly. She's an adult. She's making her own choices. Susan sighed. Music is unstable, Daniel. You got lucky, but... Lucky? I echoed. 20 years of grinding isn't luck. You know what I mean, she said impatiently. For every success like yours, there are thousands of musicians who struggle their whole lives. I studied her, realizing she still couldn't bring herself to admit she might have been wrong about my career, and about me. And yet, I said quietly, here we are. The silence between us grew heavy, until Jason appeared with fresh champagne. To new beginnings, he said cheerfully, giving me a wink. Susan excused herself and went back to Larry, who'd been watching us with that tight, suspicious look. You know, Jason said once she was gone, she kept your piano. The baby grand from your Brooklyn place, it's in her study now. That caught me off guard. That piano had been my first big purchase after the separation, a symbol of my commitment to my craft despite all the uncertainty. Interesting keepsake, I murmured. People hang on to weird things, Jason said with a shrug. Anyway, Larry's going to give a speech soon. Should be enlightening. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Larry took the microphone, champagne in hand. He thanked everyone, praised Susan's intelligence and beauty, and then shifted unexpectedly. Some people questioned our relationship, he said, his eyes drifting toward me. Some thought Susan should have stayed with someone who couldn't provide stability, someone who chose artistic indulgence over family responsibility. The room tightened. Emily stared down at her plate. Susan's smile held, but her knuckles were white around her glass. But tonight proves that the right choices lead to the right outcomes, Larry went on. Success isn't accidental, it's deliberate. It comes from sound judgment and traditional values. Is he really turning a wedding toast into a campaign speech? Jason muttered. I watched Susan, noticing the faint flush creeping up her neck, an old tell that meant she was mortified, but pretending not to be. Some paths lead to dead ends, Larry concluded. Others lead to prosperity. I'm grateful Susan chose the right one. Polite applause followed as he went back to her and kissed her cheek like he'd just scored a political point. What a tool, Jason said. You good? Perfect, I said, and to my surprise, as I meant it. And I'm here, watching. Seeing Larry so desperate to assert dominance, I felt no shame, no old doubt, only clarity. I knew the next phase of the evening was going to be very interesting. As the band started up and people moved to the dance floor, I stayed seated, content to watch Manhattan's elite perform the social choreography they'd been perfecting their whole lives. This was Susan and Larry's element now, Networking, power plays, subtle favors traded behind smiles. Not going to dance, Dad? Emily reappeared at my side, cheeks flushed. Not really my scene, sweetheart. She rolled her eyes. One dance won't kill you. I let her pull me onto the dance floor. We swayed to a jazz standard, ironically, one I'd rearranged for a film the year before. I caught Susan watching us, her face unreadable. Larry's still mad about my internship, Emily said quietly. Let him be mad, I replied. He told Mom it's ridiculous for me to waste my education on a frivolous industry when I could be making connections in finance or politics. I kept my expression calm, despite the irritation rising in my chest. And what did you tell him? That I'd rather create something meaningful than spend my life selling influence, she said, grinning. He did not like that. I chuckled. I'm sure he didn't. As the song ended, Larry appeared again, the politician's smile back in place, though his eyes were icy. Mind if I steal Emily for a moment? He asked. Senator Blackwood wants to talk about summer internship options in Washington. Actually, Emily began. It's Emily's decision, I said calmly. Larry's smile tightened. Some choices require adult guidance. Not everyone understands what's at stake. You'd be surprised what I understand, I replied evenly. Would I? He said, mask slipping. Let's be honest, Morris. You're a glorified school dropout who got lucky with one catchy tune. What could you possibly understand about building a real future? Conversations around us began to fade as people turned to listen. Dad, Emily murmured, warning in her voice. Larry pushed on, energized by the alcohol in the audience. Why don't you do everyone a favor and cut ties with my wife and her family? He said. Your presence is uncomfortable. I looked at him calmly and finally understood what Susan had seen in him. He was everything she thought she wanted. Status, security, respectability. You know what's actually uncomfortable, Larry? I said, my voice quiet but carrying. Having $500 million parked in your wife's bank while listening to you demonstrate exactly why that's a bad investment decision. Larry's face went slack. What? I think I'll close my account on Monday, I said casually. My financial advisors have been recommending it for months. I kept it there out of respect for Susan. Clearly that respect isn't mutual. The silence around us was absolute. Susan appeared at his side, her face drained of color. Daniel, she began. Larry didn't mean... Oh, I think he meant exactly what he said, I replied calmly. And I meant exactly what I said about the account. Larry's expression cycled through confusion, denial, and then dawning horror as the reality of who I was, and what he'd just done, finally started to register. The impact of my words rippled through the reception like a stone hitting still water. Conversations died, whispers rose, heads turned. Susan broke the silence first. Daniel, perhaps we could discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, I said. Larry was very clear about how he feels. I'm simply making a financial decision in response. Jason appeared at my elbow, barely containing his delight. Dude, you should see the bank president's face, he muttered. He looks like someone just canceled Christmas. Larry finally found his voice. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, he said stiffly. I had no idea you were... A successful composer, I supplied, or a major depositor at your wife's bank. Which part is confusing you? A few guests failed to hide their amusement. Emily's eyes sparkled with open satisfaction. This is hardly the appropriate setting, Larry hissed, his politician's mask shredding. You seemed perfectly comfortable insulting me in this setting, I pointed out. Interesting how etiquette suddenly matters when you're the one feeling exposed. Susan put a restraining hand on his arm as he started to speak again. Let's rejoin our guests, she said tightly. They retreated. Emily slipped to my side. That was epic, she whispered. I've never seen Larry speechless. Not exactly what I came here to do, I admitted. But I'm done being the villain in their story. The band started playing again, and the wedding party tried to pretend everything was normal. I headed toward the exit. My purpose for coming was fulfilled. Jason intercepted me near the door. Leaving already? The real show's just beginning. The bank's executive team is huddled in the corner, having what looks like a collective nervous breakdown. I've made my point, I said. Spectacularly, he agreed. You know, Susan never told anyone about your success. I think she needed to picture you still struggling, so her choices made sense. The observation hit home more than I expected. Maybe we all build narratives we can live with, stories that make our decisions feel wise instead of flawed and human. Take care of Emily, I said, pulling him into a hug, and take care of yourself. As I waited for the elevator, I heard hurried footsteps behind me, Susan, slightly out of breath. "You're leaving?" she asked. "I've stayed long enough." She studied me, really looking at me for the first time in years. "Were you this successful when we were together?" I gave her a sad smile. "No, but I was always this determined." The elevator doors slid open, offering an escape from a conversation 2 decades overdue. "Daniel," Susan said quietly, "about the account." We stepped into the quieter hallway outside the reception, the muffled sounds of music and laughter leaking through the doors behind us. "Was that really necessary?" she asked, voice tight. "Threatening the bank over personal insults?" "It wasn't a threat," I said calmly. "Larry made his feelings very clear. I'm making a business decision based on that information." She sighed, absently smoothing the fabric of her wedding dress. "He doesn't know you like I do. He doesn't understand." "That's the point, Susan," I said gently. "You don't know me anymore either. You've held on to this story, where I'm still the struggling musician you left, where your decision was the only rational choice." Her eyes met mine, a flash of painful recognition passing through them. "Why didn't you ever tell him?" I asked. "About the Oscar, the company, any of it?" Susan looked away. "It complicated the story." "Your story, you mean?" She didn't deny it. "I built a life around certain choices," she said. "Certain values. And if I succeeded on my own terms," I said quietly, "then maybe you were wrong about what matters." We stood there in silence, 20 years of unspoken truth hanging between us. "I wasn't wrong about everything," she said at last. "We wanted different lives. That hasn't changed." "No," I agreed. "It hasn't." From inside, we could hear Larry's raised voice and the bank president speaking in urgent tones. "He'll bounce back," I said. "Politicians usually do." "And the account?" she asked. I thought for a moment. The truth was I'd kept my money at Bennett Financial out of habit and a lingering emotional tie to her. Neither was a good reason anymore. "I'll move most of it," I said finally. "But I'll leave some, enough to make it clear this isn't personal revenge. I'm not trying to punish you, Susan." Relief flickered across her face, followed by something more complicated. Maybe the realization that, even now, I was still considering her well-being. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I hear your scores in films. I can always tell it's you before I even see the credits. There's a particular quality to your music, a Daniel Morris signature." Her admission caught me off guard. "You follow my career?" "From a distance," she conceded. "It would have been easier if you'd failed." Her honesty, after years of carefully curated narratives, was strangely refreshing. "Probably," I said with a small smile. "But when have I ever taken the easy path?" Susan laughed, a real unguarded laugh I hadn't heard in years. "Never. That was the problem," she said. "And maybe the point." Emily appeared in the doorway, watching us cautiously. "Everything okay?" Susan straightened, slipping her composure back on like an old suit. "Your father was just leaving," she said. I nodded. "Congratulations on your marriage, Susan. I mean that." As I walked toward the elevator, Emily fell into step beside me. "I'll walk you out," she said. Behind us, Susan returned to her reception, to Larry, to crisis management, to the life she had chosen. But something between us had shifted. A tension that had been humming for 20 years finally eased. Emily and I rode in the taxi together, Manhattan's lights smearing across the windows. She was unusually quiet, staring out at the city. "You okay?" I asked, studying her profile. So much of her mother's face, but with a softness and openness Susan had gradually traded for armor. "Yeah," she said, "just replaying Larry's face when you mentioned the account. Totally worth every awkward family dinner I'm gonna have to sit through for the next 10 years. I laughed. I wasn't trying to blow things up. "Of course not," she said, smirking. "You just casually dropped $500 million into the middle of a wedding reception." She had a point. A small, petty part of me, one I didn't often acknowledge, had enjoyed watching Larry's carefully constructed worldview collapse in real time. Do you think Mom knew? Emily asked suddenly. About how successful you've really become. I thought about it. She knew some of it, maybe not the full picture. She kept your first film award in her office drawer, Emily said. I found it once when I was looking for stamps. She shut the drawer so fast when I asked about it. That image settled in my chest like a weight. For years I'd pictured Susan dismissing my achievements, not quietly tucking them away where she could see them, but no one else could. People are complicated, I said at last. Even parents. Emily nodded. I remember when she left. You never said a bad word about her, not once. She's your mother, I replied. Still, most divorced dads don't take the high road like that. We pulled up in front of my building, but Emily didn't move to get out. What you said tonight, she began, about following your passion even when it's risky. She hesitated. I've been thinking about deferring law school. I turned fully to face her. For what? For music production, she said. Your studio internship made me realize I'm good at this, Dad. Really good. But Larry says, what does your mother say? I asked gently. Emily blinked, surprised. She told me to talk to you, said you'd understand better than she would. Something warm unfurled inside me. After everything, Susan still recognized that I could give Emily something she couldn't, permission to choose a life that wasn't safe or linear. Law school isn't going anywhere, I said. It'll still be there in a year or 5. But if music production sets you on fire inside, that fire is worth following, she said softly. Especially if it's risky, I replied. Safety rarely leads to real fulfillment. Emily leaned over and hugged me hard. Thanks, Dad. As she pulled back, her phone chimed. She glanced at the screen and snorted. It's Mom. Apparently Larry is in full damage control mode. The bank president looks like he wants to strangle him. I winced. That was never my goal. Maybe not, Emily said, grinning. But sometimes karma uses interesting delivery systems. She kissed my cheek and slid out of the taxi. I'll call you tomorrow. This wedding is officially going down in family legend. As the taxi pulled away, I realized something simple and profound. I no longer needed Susan to validate my success. I no longer needed Larry to respect my choices. I had already built the life I wanted, on my own terms. That, in itself, was enough. 3 months passed. Autumn faded into winter, and Manhattan was briefly softened by a rare, clean snowfall. I was working late in my studio when my phone rang. Susan's name lit up the screen. We'd had almost no contact since the wedding, aside from a short, formal email chain about the account transfers. I had done what I promised, moved most of the funds, but left enough to make it clear I wasn't lashing out. Susan, I answered. Everything okay? Yes, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I'm calling because the bank is hosting its annual Arts Endowment dinner next month. We'd like you to be the keynote speaker. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. You want me to speak at a bank event? After everything that happened? It was my idea, actually, she said. The theme is unconventional paths to success. It seemed fitting. The irony was almost too perfect. What does Larry think about this? I asked. There was a short pause. Larry and I are taking some time apart. That surprised me. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? She asked, and for a second I heard a hint of the old Susan under the polished tone. Yes, I said honestly. I never wanted you to be unhappy, she exhaled. The wedding incident was just a symptom. Larry wanted a trophy wife who would bolster his political ambitions, not a CEO with her own agenda. His loss, I said simply. Another pause. Emily showed me her music production portfolio, Susan continued. She's talented, like her father. She is, I agreed, waiting for the familiar speech about stability, backup plans, and safer careers. I told her I'd help her defer law school, Susan said instead. That sometimes the unconventional route is the right one. I nearly dropped the phone. You did? Don't sound so shocked, Daniel. I am capable of growth, she said dryly, though I could hear the faint smile. About the endowment dinner, she added. Will you do it? I will, I said. You haven't even asked about the fee. Consider it a favor between old friends, I replied. She was quiet for a moment. Are we friends? We share an extraordinary daughter and 20 years of history, I said. I'd say we're something. Something, she echoed. I suppose that's accurate. After we hung up, I sat at the piano and let my hands fall into a melody I hadn't played in years, the first piece I wrote after our separation. It had started as something heavy and sorrowful, but over time, I'd reshaped it into something quieter and more hopeful, much like my life, I realized. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Dad, Mom told me about the keynote. Full circle much?" I smiled, thinking about how differently everything had unfolded compared to what I'd imagined the night of the wedding. I hadn't gone there looking for revenge or some grand vindication. Those had shown up on their own. What I'd actually found was far better. Peace with the past, deep pride in my daughter, and a steady, unshakable certainty that staying true to myself had always been the right call. Some people would call what happened revenge. The dropout turned keynote speaker, the struggling musician gaining acclaim, the ex-husband finding contentment while the shiny new marriage faltered. But I didn't see it that way. It wasn't revenge, it was life, unfolding like one of my scores. Every dissonance, every unresolved chord eventually resolving into the right key. A composition that, in its own imperfect, unexpected way, had turned out just right.